The last time I made a video about anti-racist books, it was pretty heated, very emotionally charged, and this one is going to be a little different because this is less a rant about the way books are used to virtue signal, the way people invested in book clubs in the couple of months after the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, only to drop them a few months later, or just the general performative allyship that can happen on BookTube and in real life. This is a question and a call out for the people who make those anti-racist reads list. What does anti-racist mean to you? And I ask this question not because I'm expecting to hear like a regurgitation of Ibram Kendi's definition, but because I am seeing so many of these lists pop up on the eve of Black History Month that honestly baffle me. Because as someone who has read a lot of anti-racist text, read a lot of text that is historical and academic, read a lot of memoirs of Black people who have experienced racism, there is a difference between each of those subjects, and I feel like these lists is condensing them all in a way that does a disservice to the books, but also a disservice to the people who are trying to pick them up. Let me give you an example. Two memoirs I love are I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou and the Autobiography of Malcolm X. Both of these people, Maya and Malcolm, are Black. Both of them dealt with racism and discrimination and prejudice, and both of them in their own ways contributed to the advancement of the movement towards equality and equity. I also love The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein and The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. Both of these books are deep dives into the historical reasons and implications for wealth inequality, the prison industrial system, housing segregation, and they really break down how when we look at the corruption in this country, especially as it relates to racism, it is not solely about individual personal prejudice. There are laws and acts, government ordinances, and state-sanctioned choices that have led and continue to perpetuate inequality. And then you have books like Me and White Supremacy by Layla Saad or White Fragility by DiAngelo that were specifically written for a white audience to reckon with their white feelings and white guilt and issues in engaging in a conversation against white supremacy when they're still understanding their role in it. All of these books are incredibly different, and yet I am seeing them and many others being lumped together under this category of anti-racist. Now, as with everything I say on this channel, one person, one opinion, but I would not necessarily call each and every one of these books anti-racist, because when I think of anti-racist texts, I'm thinking about texts that are explicitly attacking racism, breaking it down, deconstructing it, understanding it in the context of the current political climate, the current social and economic climate. Perhaps you may find that to be a too limited definition, but what concerns me is that I cannot tell you how many times I have seen people on this platform and in real life pick up one of these books and then say, I didn't feel like I learned something from it, or I didn't really feel like it was for me, or I didn't feel like I was the audience for it, or I'm really not sure what I'm supposed to get out of it. And I'm like, if you approach every book that is written by a Black person that has Black characters in it as an anti-racist text, of course you're going to be confused. Of course you're going to come away feeling dissatisfied or like you wasted your time, because that is not the goal of each of these books. Let's talk about Toni Morrison, one of my favorite authors. Do I think an individual from any background could learn so much about race and gender and the way that Black women specifically navigate the world from her text? Absolutely. Do I think that they could have their minds open? They could have their ideas challenged? They could empathize with these characters? Absolutely. But I personally would not call Beloved and Sula and Song of Solomon and Tar Baby as anti-racist texts in the same way that I would call The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee an anti-racist text. It's just a completely different narrative, a completely different point of view. And I'm not just saying this only because Toni Morrison primarily wrote fiction and the other books I've mentioned are nonfiction. There are fiction books that when the authors wrote them, they explicitly said, or you could see in the text, their goal was to build empathy. Their goal was to show audiences the inner workings of characters that are normally ignored by society. I am not at all implying that you can't learn anti-racist principles from fiction. Absolutely. But what I'm saying is that we should not be so quick to slap the label anti-racist on any book written by a Black person, on any book that features Black characters, especially because not all skin folk are kinfolk. Like, there are plenty of texts out there written by Black people that I'm like, all right, what was the moral of this story? You only learn to accept yourself when you're accepted by a white man? Like, oh, the only black characters in this story fulfill just standard stereotypes and are the side characters to the other characters of color or white characters who get all the attention. Like, just because a book has a black author or has black characters doesn't inherently make it anti-racist. Furthermore, there are authors who, and I think about playwrights too, specifically, who I've had conversations with about this, who will specifically say, this play is not about race. This play is about talking animals. Or this play is not about race. This play is about a mother and daughter struggling to reconcile their different recollections of the past. And then outside audiences, mainly white audiences, will look at it and say, well, I noticed you didn't really talk about the way the different shades of the fur of the animals play into colorism. It's like, what? Like, if a black author wants to incorporate themes of race and colorism and prejudice into their work, of course they can. But that is not every single person's goal. And you can have a black author and black characters and have a story that is not explicitly about race. And I feel like those distinctions are being blurred in some well-meaning lists about anti-racist books, and also, I'm going to say, some less well-meaning actors who are looking to find excuses to get rid of texts that are by black authors. I'm not going to get into a whole breakdown of what critical race theory is and isn't, but what we do know is that in the United States, there are school districts that are banning books written by black authors, banning books that feature black characters because they promote critical race theory, when critical race theory is nowhere in sight in the text, when the books aren't even necessarily about race. Like, it's just about a black girl who wants to be a ballerina. So do you see how all of these things get conflated? You have individuals, I'm going to assume are well-meaning, picking up books that they hope will teach them about race and help them work through their internalized oppression, only to find out that that's not at all what's on the page, and are dissatisfied or speak poorly on the book simply because the book was written for a different purpose. And then you have the political implications of assuming that any book written by a black author or features black characters explicitly must be talking about race and explicitly must be talking about critical race theory, which are two different things. So maybe this is an issue that other people don't care about or that I am thinking too hard about, but I really think they're connected. And especially as we are in January, and on the eve of Black History Month, in which I know people are going to be pulling up and sharing and recommending these lists of anti-racist reads left and right, I hope you keep this in mind. I hope you consider, what do you as an individual mean when you say anti-racist? And if you are going to be reading more books by black authors in February, what types of books? Are you going for fiction? Are you going for nonfiction? Are you looking for books whose intent is to teach you something? Are you just looking for a great story? Like, it is okay to be specific about those things, because I think the more specific you are, the better chances you are of picking up a book that actually suits your needs, and also the better chance it gives the authors and the books. Because is it fair to give a book 2 stars because you didn't learn anything, when the author was like, this is a fantasy about a princess. What were you trying to learn? Just because she's black doesn't mean I'm going to teach you about fantasy colorism. Like, do you get what I'm saying? Anyway, so this is just something I would like you to keep in mind for the entire year, but especially during Black History Month. And I'm going to leave all the books I mentioned in this video in the description below. Most of them I would recommend, because most of them I have read them. If I have not read them, I will mark that down. But whether or not a book is considered anti-racist and it is written by a black author, I hope that is not the deciding factor. I hope it is not the deciding factor for you that a book needs to check some, diversity box in order to just to be a story that you engage in. So, until next time, bye.